All right, everybody. Welcome to Global Design Talk by btrax. I'm John Hayato Branderhorst. I'll be interviewing Adam Green, lead product designer at Reforge. He's got a lot of great experience, which I'll ask him to explain and kind of introduce himself. But just wanted to say welcome, and I hope you enjoy the next little bit of me chatting with Adam about design. Adam, welcome.
Thanks. Great to
Thank
be
you
here.
for joining. Thank you for joining remote, as I believe you're based in the Netherlands.
Yeah,
And so, if you don't mind, can you just give us an introduction of who you are, where you're coming from, and what we can expect from talking to you?
sure. Yeah, I have had a long and circuitous career that has brought me to my current role as a product design lead, starting with a majoring mostly in sculpture and glass and being a glass blower for quite a few years early on, and then found my way more into urban design and really looking at public spaces, designing cities, and designing for all of the different folks that might be using those spaces, which brought me to trying to do that type of work for an educational institution in the Bay Area and launching some new programs for them, merging their type of content and experiences with bringing it to new, generally public spaces around the world. Um, that took me to saying, hey, I'd love to figure out how to take all of this experience, try a new type of impact, which was really around, can we make cities healthier? I launched a company around 2017 with some co-founders, and we ran that for a number of years to try and really figure out ways to take, creative ways of hacking public spaces, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
for more opportunities for health. And then found my way towards working for Reforge, back to education, again, trying to kind of like grow generally the impact of providing opportunities to learn from other experts in the field. And it's been a wonderful experience to be more in a traditional startup experience working here and leading both the growth team and now the team that is working on other teams that might
Mm-hmm.
be using Reforge.
Got it. I think you are, I don't think I know, you are the first person I've interviewed, maybe even met, honestly, who has a background in blowing glass. How
Yeah,
did you get into that? I just want to understand how do you even get into that space?
I going through high school, I hated high school.
Okay.
Uh, and so I didn't necessarily want to go to college. And so I found my way to live with my brother in Chicago. And when I was there, there happened to be a glass studio nearby. I
Okay.
liked fire in general,
All right.
and so I was like, all right, let me give this a try. Very
Mhm.
very much on a lark, but ultimately, what it really did was I got pretty hooked, and it ended up teaching me a lot of habits as I really began to pursue it that I think have been the foundation for the rest of my career.
Mhm.
Um, even though obviously it moved pretty far away from glass blowing,
Mhm.
but that was so. Even though it started kind of serendipitously, I still refer back to like those skills all
Mhm.
the time. It's kind of a crazy thing.
Got it. Got it. And I'm guessing at that time you wouldn't even consider yourself anything related to design. Like that probably was not part of your nomenclature.
No,
And
no,
so
not at
what
all.
from that experience and where you are now, what does design mean to you? And kind of how has that perspective changed over the years,
This is like the hardest question. I
I
it's a very good question. Um, I think at the end of the day, there's probably a lot of definitions out there. I think at the end of the day, for me, design is um, applying deep thinking and frameworks to a particular problem
guess.
utilizing maybe certain tool sets to frame that problem to come up with, a really good functional solution. And that might be visual, that might be physical product, that might be experiential design. But at the end of the day, you're faced with, hey, we need to accomplish this thing, and entering it with curiosity to learn everything you can about that thing, whether you want to call that design thinking or user-centered design, whatever you want to call it, but thinking
Yep.
very deeply about that problem and how it impacts the people that are going to experience it, and
Hmm.
then using that to find a solution. I think that's like a very broad,
Yeah.
vague thing.
Yeah.
But
But
I
it
think
makes
that's why
sense.
I've been able, yeah. And I think that's why in my I ran an art gallery, that did community events. I did a lot of different things. And
Hmm.
I think generally I've been able to tie those different experiences together for some of those core principles of design that
Hmm.
when that clicked for me, it helped a little bit say, oh, okay, no, I am a designer, and these are things I could be drawing on to continue to like have impact at whatever I might be working on.
Hmm. And I can only imagine that working with glass, you have to be singularly focused. There's no multitasking. When you're trying to
Yeah.
well, you should, I guess, be, because you should really be focused on
Probably.
what you're making. Which is an
Yeah.
interesting skill set that I feel like designers are better at, just in general, than other industry, not other industry, other departments or other types of folks. Especially these days, right? We're always trying to do multiple things. So I feel like that probably sets you up for success in your ability to focus on a specific task or kind of role,
Mhm.
I guess. Is that, does that ring true, or is that kind of like, well, not really, John. I'm still amazing at multitasking.
I think there are aspects of it for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a shadow side of focus, right, where you can become too um, attached to
Mm.
in the weeds, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I know that I've talked to a lot of folks that struggle with kind of losing the forest for the trees when they're trying to figure out something. And for
Okay.
me, one of the areas that glass really actually, like one of those foundational character building aspects of it, was letting go lightly, letting go of that attachment,
Mm-hmm.
embracing failure.
Mm-hmm.
When you're working with glass, you could spend an hour, 45 minutes on a piece, maybe longer,
Yep.
um, and it can just jump and fall on the ground and literally shatter in front of you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it can break when it's done and shatter later. Um, and so you really have to care deeply about what you're making and hold
Mm-hmm.
it at a distance, which allows you to have a little bit of different perspective. So failure was, and embracing failure was one of the best aspects that I learned from glass blowing. The other quick thing I'll say
Which,
about that
yeah.
is there's one more kind of fun piece about that is to learn how to blow glass. You have to um, work very hot. You have to find
Mm-hmm.
your boundary of how you can make of the material, and so that means that working so hot that it melts and falls off, or working too cold where it breaks. And through those failures, you find your sweet spot. And I think like that has allowed me the mentality of embracing as many failures as possible to kind of figure out what that actual sweet spot is for a solution of any kind, and welcoming all of the like
Yeah.
no's or failures.
In some ways, it sounds very stoic. Um, but
Certainly.
you know,
There's certain aspects.
I feel like your experience in Chicago set you up for success in the Bay Area in a lot of ways. And because the Bay Area, a lot of the mantras are, and there's different ways of saying it. Some people agree, some people don't, but like the idea of failing fast. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that can be a struggle for people to kind of like embrace. But when you move there, what, by the way, what took you to the Bay Area then from kind of working
College.
in Chicago? College, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I moved to the Bay Area for to study glass, which was kind of in
Oh,
retrospect,
interesting.
was a silly. Yeah, I know, because you could work at a studio and learn everything new. I'm so glad I did it, because
Yeah.
at the school I went to, California College of the Arts, I got exposed to a lot of other um, mediums and ways of thinking and critical thought, which
Hmm.
ultimately was what led me to, start connecting with some of the folks in the urban design world. And so I was on the team that started something called Parking Day, which
Hmm.
was, a guerrilla action, taking over parking spots to create public spaces.
Hmm.
I could talk for hours about that, but that,
Hmm.
obviously it blew up, and then
Yep.
it got even bigger during COVID. That was years later,
Right.
but uh, that wouldn't have happened had I not been part of the art community. So even though I went to study glass, I quickly got distracted, and joined that crew.
Well, and you went from working on something that was maybe, for one person or for a family, or, like in terms of scale, like you're working on one thing that had one purpose, like for a certain whoever was going
Mm-hmm.
to be receiving that product, to working at a much bigger level, scalable, like really thinking big picture of how to solve for many. Um,
Mm-hmm.
was that how was that process? Like it sounds like you went to school for glass, you met the right people, so you were able to kind of like understand how to create for many. I would say, like, and I guess my question is around that, like, how has that trajectory kind of gone? Like now, are you like what is the kind of community you're solving for now compared to like
Mm-hmm.
when you were working in the public space?
Yeah. Um, Good question. I Going back to your first question about like what is design, I think one of the power of design is how the solutions you come up with can scale,
Mm-hmm.
um, especially if they're a really good one. And so, yeah, coming out of art school and seeing the type of impact that one could have by designing for cities,
Mm-hmm.
I was very much hooked on the ability of like how I could scale my own impact on making the world better
Mm-hmm.
through whatever design activities or anything I was doing. So, I think that definitely carried through when we were looking at when I was working at the Exploratorium and the Science Museum in San
Yep.
Francisco. Um, One of the reasons that drew me to taking that position was, if I thought about scaling impact, hard to beat education, hard to beat
Yeah.
teaching other people critical thought or any of the one. There's a lot of amazing outcomes that come from like the experiential exhibits that Exploratorium was focused on. And so being able to have a larger impact in the world by running those projects became
Mm-hmm.
incredibly compelling. And I think ultimately the seed for me to want to increase that even more. So
Mm-hmm.
without going too far, there's being a nonprofit can be challenging. Um,
Yeah.
so that was what really, that's why I became a founder, is like, I think if we started a company, uh, talk about scaling, like if we could find a smart way to, um, solve some of the create opportunities for exercise and fitness in cities that could really
Mm-hmm.
blow up. So I was very much compelled to that. Going to now with Reforge, it's back to education. It's enabling
Mm-hmm.
people um, to learn what they need to scale their own ability to impact others to be more
Yeah.
effective. Um, I mean, that's one of the things I love about it at the end of the day. But I do think that that has been a central thread for all of my career opportunities, is how can I
Mm-hmm.
have more impact um,
Yeah.
with whatever work I'm doing. Um, and I think that's ultimately what would draw me to any opportunity as I've been bouncing around.
And the before Reforge, like the things when I hear you talk about like exploratorium or the public spaces, and even back to glassblowing, a lot of it's experience. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
it's very tactile in terms of, like I think when you were at public recreation, these fitness spaces that you all were designing for people to at least just to go check out and things like that. And Reforge is now more, it's designed like it's not like you're not building a product in the traditional sense of how somebody would say nowadays. when you say product designer to somebody, that could mean a lot of
Right.
different things. I think, we,
Hmm.
and so has there been a shift in terms of how you think, like when you're building something in your previous roles to kind of reforge and kind of uh, like in the education space?
Yeah, it's a good question. No, I would say no. In
No.
fact, I think like one
That's
of the
fine.
superpowers, yeah, for any of those experiences, you have to think so like what makes a designer, what their superpower is the ability to dive into somebody else's shoes and have and like really challenge themselves to have deep empathy about that person's experience.
Hmm.
And once you start to like learn about, and this goes back to a designer being focused on the problem, if you learn about someone's experience, um,
Hmm.
that thinking process, learning about their journey, learning about the space, all of those types of things, that doesn't change. And so
Hmm.
working in public spaces, I had to think about all of the stakeholders and what their motivations or problems or all those things were in this public space, be it a bureaucrat from the mayor's office to the person that lived and was concerned about noise to the person that
Hmm.
was maybe transitory as they would cross this public space on the way from point A to point B.
Hmm.
So that translates no matter what design space you enter. The outputs might change. You might have to learn some new tools like AutoCAD versus Figma, and you might
Hmm.
have to have some different patterns on how those solutions get solved in that function, whatever that output is. But the thinking has, I think, has remained the same, and it's been something I've leaned on quite a bit. Is that I've
Yeah.
exposed myself to so many different types of stakeholders in the past that it's much easier for me to access what their experience might be or what they might be bringing to the
Yeah.
problem that I'm trying to solve. Um, so yeah, I think that the thinking hasn't changed, and if anything, that varied experience has allowed me to be much more effective at
Hmm.
Reforge um, because I have now sense of what even the internal stakeholders might be thinking
Hmm.
about, what our marketing team might be coming at,
Yeah.
types of problems they have, or and then what our users, of course, have. So yeah, I think that the thinking stays the same, the output changes.
And I know we're talking about from a design perspective, but that's just great life advice, right? Like the idea of having more empathy, and instead of looking at things from a perception standpoint, looking at it from a perspective standpoint and putting yourself in other people's shoes, the world would be a kinder place if more people did that, right? And so
I
I
would
love
think
that.
so.
And I wasn't expecting, I wasn't expecting that answer, but it rings true for anybody that watches this. Interview. Um, and a couple of kind of off-topic questions, because as
Sure.
we kind of wind down a little bit, but you've worked in designing spaces around health, fitness. How has that impacted your designing of your daily life or your day? Is there anything that you're like, well, I do, through my experience over the past, 15, 20 odd years, I now start my day doing this every day, or I find that I'm a better designer because I do this, this, and
Mm.
this.
It's tough to be a designer when you think about experience all the time and go through the world because you do notice all the little problems that you could be solving all the time.
Yeah.
So I do spend a fair amount of time trying to figure out. I try and avoid though optimizing my life because I think that
Okay.
gets you on like a treadmill that you're not going to win, and there's no high
Hmm.
score at the end of life. So it might not be so much pressure. So any of the types of things I do on
Hmm.
my day to day is to try and create enough, uh, I guess, routine that
Hmm.
I create the space for the creative thinking that I want to do without being so rigid that I can't allow the spontaneity. So that's at like a high level. But I do, when I was a founder and, um, you know, experience the incredibly high stress that entails.
Hmm.
Um, I would say that fitness, I had a therapist at the time that told me eat, sleep, exercise. If you have those three, that's like 90% of the stuff to like
Makes
keep
sense.
your mental, and that can mean all sorts of things. It could mean a walk or whatever. But
Right.
so, eating healthy ish, uh,
Yep.
getting enough sleep, And yeah, I do have a fairly standard fitness regimen just for the mental health part of it.
Right.
Um, Outside of that, for being a designer, I think um, pursuing whatever you're curious about on the side and always
Hmm.
having side projects is something that I still do and have found value, and I keep pulling it into my work. Um,
Yep.
don't stymie and don't prejudge the types of things that you might be interested in, because it might
Mhm.
open up a whole new world. I've discovered immense amount of things just from being listening to my own curiosity and going after it. Yeah, lots of coffee.
Coffee is good. And this, it's advice I wish I would have known in my 20s. I mean, I've lived a fairly healthy kind of focus. Like I've made the right choices in a lot of ways, but like you said, I think the idea of being kind to yourself and working on a routine, understanding what is going to help you be the best version of you, but not being so focused like, oh, I have to run a 5K every day, right? Like changing
Yeah,
that thought
yeah.
process and being like,
No, that's
for
well
me, it's
put.
find your 20. Like I find my
Right.
20 every day. It could be 20 minutes of yoga,
Mm-hmm.
it could be a 20-minute walk. It's just something that I know I'm going to appreciate as I go through the day. If I do a little bit of, well, whether it's cardio or something that just gets my body moving.
100%.
Yeah.
And especially in the day and age that where your social media is likely full of versions of how you're doing everything in your life incorrectly. And you could be doing it a
Yes.
little bit better.
Yep.
And I think it's okay to do a lot incorrectly. I think it can be a lot of fun to do things wrong and to do them your own way. Uh,
Mhm.
and it takes the pressure off, because yeah, nobody really wins at life at the end of the day. So there's no
Right.
optimizing your way to a perfect life. So there are some things that I focus on in my routine. I like to have my coffee set up.
Mhm.
But yeah, outside of that type of thing, I give myself a lot of leeway to live and think and pursue whatever I happen to be curious about.
I love it. Curiosity. Be curious. It's a good
Yeah.
advice. Speaking of advice,
Yeah.
like what advice would you give to yourself if it was we're talking 20 years ago or something, anything like that, or somebody who's interested in like starting a design career or changing roles or anything like that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We talked about curiosity. I think passion is overrated. I think
Yeah.
finding your if you're lucky enough to have found your passion,
Hmm.
kudos. I've met those folks and they're fantastic. And
Yep.
I've also met more, and I think it's rare to find your passion. Um, so the advice I often give is to follow your curiosity.
Hmm.
A lot of people deny the whispers of things they might be interested in their own head, because they'll talk themselves out of it for fear of other things they should do, or probably like other pressures,
Hmm.
other judgments. So I would say follow that curiosity. And when I started doing that, that's where I found some really interesting things. I would have never dreamed that I'd be where I
Right.
am now, but it was for that. I think the other big piece of advice is that absolutely everybody, unless you're a narcissist, has imposter syndrome. Everybody's figuring it out.
Hmm.
And so being confident in climbing the cringe mountain and just
Hmm.
trying things and learning, that is everything. And that gets you. And then you get to look back and see what kind of mountain you've climbed. Um, but if you can, strengthen yourself and your own internal confidence that saying, this is a common experience, it's gonna feel uncomfortable. I'm gonna
Yep.
fail a lot, and you kind of embrace that part of it,
Yep.
especially as you're pursuing things you're curious about. Holy smokes, the types of things that unlocks, in my experience, is huge. So yeah, those would be two areas: embrace the cringe and embrace your own curiosity.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think if anybody's watching this who's quite a bit younger, um, the idea of imposter syndrome, that that's not going to go away. right? Like
No, I
as
still have
you
it
move up in your
immensely.
career, like you take on a harder role or manage more people, there's always going to be that imposter syndrome. One thing and I'll add on to that quickly in that I realize that where I'm at today is partially based off of who I've surrounded myself with.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you surround yourself with people who are also curious, who also you can talk to, like guys don't talk enough about this kind of stuff, right? Just in general, right? Like especially older generation, but like the idea of like talking to your inner circle about imposter syndrome and kind of talking about your curiosity and just finding people that are also like on a similar path or at least have similar ideals, the ability,
Yeah,
to fail fast, to take care of yourself and really have a
yeah.
healthy, I think, lifestyle is key.
I think if you're a designer, if you're
Yeah.
looking, the design community is a perfect place for that because
Mhm.
every project in some way you start out being an imposter. Like if you're doing it
Mhm.
right, you're learning some new problem that you probably have very little context about. And so you're like, oh my
Mhm.
God, I know nothing about this. What the heck am I going to do? So I think that feeling, that space of ambiguity and newness
Mhm.
is just inherent to the role. And so
Yeah.
everybody that I've talked to has immense amounts of experience and strategies for finding their way of feeling the fear and doing it anyways as a designer. So it's a good community for those types of conversations, that's for sure.
Nice, nice. And one last thing, if somebody's
Yeah,
interested in connecting with you, are we saying connect on LinkedIn and maybe send you a
yeah,
DM? Any questions? Want to if somebody
absolutely.
wants to
Yeah,
kind of continue the conversation? All right.
100%. I love helping folks. I've changed my careers a lot. I started
Yeah.
companies. I'm happy to help. A lot of folks helped me along the way, so I'm
Right.
always open to helping how I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending
Yeah.
kind of your Friday evening to chat with me.
Well, there's still
Um,
sunlight back there, so
there you go. The beauty of of us going into spring.
yeah,
So
exactly.
I guess if yeah, I had a blast. This kind of 30 minutes flew by. And everybody, I hope you also enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please do all the cool fun things of liking, commenting, subscribing, and I look forward to seeing you on the flip side. We'll hopefully connect in person at some point again soon.
It'd be
So
great.
awesome. Thank you, Adam. And
Thanks, John.
cool.